number of CIO student reps, of that I'm aware. I've also got, or we have got, some visitors to the university, because the majority of those student reps over to the left-hand side of the lecture theatre are all from, surprise, surprise, the University of Greenwich. So if you're not from the University of Greenwich, welcome to our 300-year-old building, which is listed rather obviously. In fact, it's not only listed, it is actually an ancient monument in its own right. So, welcome to our world of heritage, and congratulations on finding the entrance to get here in time. It's a little bit complicated some of the time. So, my name is Christine Gordon. I'm one of the lecturers at the University of Greenwich. If I move very swiftly and put my CIOB hat on, I'm actually a trustee of the CIOB. I'm also quite an active member of the London Committee. I'm the class chair of London, so I am perpetually involved with activities particular to CPD and the management of London CIOB. The lady organising you is Brooke Grange. Brooke is one of our full-time CIOB administrators. So she, Sam Briggs and Claire Hiley are backup and support team. So any events you go to, or you're talking to people online, it's one of Brooke's colleagues that you are talking to. I am not presenting to you this evening. To those of you who are my students, we've actually just concluded a facilities management case study. And that's why I've asked Etienne to speak to the wider audience this evening. Etienne LaRue is Vice Chair to Novus. Fast forward to our trustees meeting tomorrow. You may not be Vice Chair to anything, who knows? That's what we agree at the trustees meeting tomorrow. But as we stand here today, Etienne is the Vice Chair. I've actually got video footage of Etienne here when you were a student of Kingston Uni, participating in one of the local challenges. Suffice to say, if you want a tip for the future, Etienne was, and his team from Kingston, they were one of the few student teams who actually turned out in suits. Everyone else was really casual, but did you not win? Did you win or you got high in the ranking? Yeah, I'm afraid our team from Greenwich were a little bit slack that year. However, there's opportunities for you to come. So, without further ado, Etienne is going to talk to you about building information modelling, a key and core topic for you all, facilities management, and potentially the relativity to. Maybe he's going to talk about the advantages, maybe he's going to talk about best practice in terms of management of both. What he is most definitely going to do is he's going to talk to you in a very live context. Etienne has moved on from Kingston. He now works for, as the slide tells you, TNT. I'm going to call you a PM. I don't know if you're an APM or a PM. Let's leave you as a PM. Yeah, but I'm sure you're going to talk about your experience at TNT, what's ongoing, and your interfaces with BIM and FM. What I will say as a really quick aside is I am progressively trying to get Etienne more and more involved in the national CIC grouping of BIM for FM, because he is really proactive and really interested. And if there are any others of you who progressively get more and more interested in facilities management, it will be really good if you join our special interest groups, because they are really critical. So, no more from me. I'm going to leave the floor to Etienne. I'm hoping we're going to invite questions, something like that. I'll leave them with you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christine, for that great introduction. Like Christine said, I'm here to talk about BIM and facilities management. Now, just before I start, just for me to kind of get a feel of who you are, who of you are studying at the moment? Okay, so just over half. So those of you that are working, who of you are project managers? Any project managers? What, construction managers, I guess? Yeah? Just shout out. What else are you?
Design managers.
Design manager? Yeah?
Sustainability. Cost manager.
Okay, all sorts.
QS.
Okay. On any of those that work, who works actively on a BIM project? 2. Okay, great. I'm sure over the next few years all of you will be working on some sort of a BIM project. It is a bit of a buzzword, unfortunately. The acronym is its Achilles heel, because people think BIM is modeling, and it's not. It's much more than modeling. So I'm here to talk to you tonight about BIM and what it means to myself and how that relates to facilities management. Because ultimately I think that's where the biggest benefits of BIM are to be had. So just to start off, yes, that is me, Etienne Leroux. I'm a BIM project manager working for Turner & Townsend. Hopefully in a few years I will just be a project manager and we won't talk about BIM anymore. We'll just talk about normal projects in a digital environment, which is this revolution that we're going through at the moment. Like Christine also said, I'm the Senior Vice Chair of the CIOB Novus Group, and I presume most of you are here because you saw the event on our website, and I'm a great ambassador for Novus and helping students and young people get on the ladder to a professional qualification. So just a bit of background, not so long ago, about 8 years now, I was working as a Royal Engineer in the British Army, even though I'm from South Africa, and a paratrooper. So for about 6 years, I was managing construction projects all over the world. In Afghanistan, I did 2 tours of Afghanistan, building bridges, building helicopter landing sites, roads, tunnels, all sorts of construction in arduous conditions. I decided after my second tour of Afghanistan that perhaps I had had enough, and I went back to university as a mature student. And that was only 3 years ago. I graduated last year as a mature student, so I'm very much fresh into civilian, in a civilian context of working. And since I've been working for Turner & Townsend over the last year, I've been with them for a year now. I work in the technology team, so we are project managers working purely on BIM projects. Those are the 3 projects that I'm currently working on. They all range between 50 to 120 million pounds. So just before we move on, who has seen this slide or this diagram? A couple of you. It's hard to avoid using it because I think it's actually quite a good diagram from Autodesk. And essentially, it tells us what building information modeling actually is, as opposed to just a 3D model. The students, who's heard of BIM as a student? Okay, so most of you, which is really, really good. I hope you know that it's more than just 3D modeling. And I mean, essentially what it is, it's making use of digital information throughout the whole life cycle of an asset. So even during concept design, detailed design, we carry out lots of analysis. We then produce lots of drawings from those models. We can use the models to fabricate. We can add cost information. We can add program or sequencing information, logistics, O&M, operations and maintenance at the very end before we renovate or demolish. This really is by far the longest period. The rest of it takes, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This takes 60 years. So this should actually be a lot bigger. And that's where I think the biggest benefits are to be had. So essentially, I see BIM as a methodology of working. It's just a way of working. All we're doing is, instead of sending lots of paper to each other or emails, we're now working on what's called a common data environment, a CDE. Really important to know what a common data environment means. And in that common data environment, we share the same information. So I don't copy what I send to the facilities manager and to the structural engineer and the cost estimator. We all work off this single source of the truth in the common data environment, which is really which really sits at the heart of BIM Level 2, which we'll come on to in a minute. Obviously, lots of things that you can do with BIM, like we said. Top left-hand corner, that's just a rendering that we did for a hotel. So instead of building a big mock-up for the client to walk in to see what he wants his hotel to look like, we just create a really high-resolution rendered image or model, and he's able to walk through his model and see exactly what it's going to look like. If he doesn't like it, we can change anything immediately. Top right-hand corner, clash detection. Sure you've heard of clash detection. Yeah, really big benefit of 3D modeling. We put our models together, and wherever there's a beam going through a wall or a column, we're able to solve those issues during the design, so that when we come onto site, we don't actually build a column and a beam and they clash on site, because that costs us a lot of money. I also spoke about analysis. This is an example of a project where we looked at how people behave in a certain building. And essentially it's just an algorithm that simulates human behavior. And you can put people in there and say, well, okay, if this was a normal day, if they were shopping, and all of a sudden we say, well, okay, let's double the amount of people because it's Boxing Day sales. How would those people react, and what would the shopping experience be like? And if it's extremely congested around the checkout areas or the escalators or entrances, then we know we need to change the design to accommodate a day where there's lots and lots of people. So you can actually influence the design right at the very, very start, so that you don't have to build it and then at the end you realize, actually, hang on, we should have made the doors much bigger. Because that's catastrophic, isn't it? Especially in emergencies when people are trying to get out. We also talk about dimensions of BIM. The fourth dimension, or 4D, is really taking a model and adding planning data to it. So, any project managers here? One? I saw one. A planner. Brilliant. Okay. Planners and PMs. So you must be familiar with Gantt chart. So all you look at all day. So what we're actually doing now is, instead of trying to interpret Gantt charts, we link an activity with the model. So if it's going to take us 6 weeks to pile, we just connect it to the piles, we link it to the model, and we can actually play the sequence off. So we can almost build it in a digital environment. And if there's a clash or if the sequence isn't right, we can actually change the program to accommodate that. This is incredible stuff. For the first time, we can test the buildability long before we get on site. So we test it and we test it, and when we are 100% sure that the build is going to be as efficient as possible with the least amount of waste, then we go onto site, and then we do it once, and once only. There's another dimension, 5D, where we add cost information to the model. So this is a natural gas plant out in the sea, where we analyze the design, and you can see progressively, as the design develops, all of those elements are linked to a schedule, which is linked to a cost. So that you can see the cost increase every time you add another structural member. And as the design develops, you can see, actually, hang on a minute, we're over budget. The client can't afford it anymore. We now have to either change the design and value engineer it in a way. We might have to remove something or replace something with something that's cheaper, so that by the time we get to the end, we know 100% that the client can afford it. Really, really critical stuff. You can't do that with paper. You can't do that with drawings. So for cost managers, this is really, really critical. If you're a QS, over the next few years, this is what you're going to use to make your life easier. You're not going to be replaced by models and people who just do quick quantity takeoffs. It's going to make your job easier.
Do you still have to manually put in the schedule of how long you think it will take?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So if you're a planner, this won't replace you. You still need a human being to interpret how long is it going to take to erect the scaffold and put the cladding on. Computers can't do that yet. So this bit is really important, but linking it to the model, you're able to find soft clashes and streamline the program as much as possible and actually condense it really, really well. So cost managers, QSs, don't worry, this is going to make your life easier. You're actually going to become more important to the design process because you're able to focus on bringing value to the project instead of counting a load of steel work. Then we go on to the sixth dimension, or 6D, which is really asset management, or BIM during operations. So we've designed, we've built the asset, and now we've handed it over to the client. The client's really happy because not only does he have a physical asset, he has a digital one that's exactly the same as the physical one. So this is making facilities management a lot easier. On this slide, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little red mark up there where your facilities manager might have walked on site with an iPad, realized that that fan unit is really noisy. There's something wrong with it. So instead of now having to go back into the office to go and find the drawings, to go and find the specification and find out who to call to come and fix the problem, he stands there, clicks on the fan unit on the iPad, and it brings up all the information right there. Don't have to go and look for any of it. It's right there. And this is really where we're going to drive massive, massive efficiencies. Really big efficiencies. So, again, you have a model, the geometry. That's really important. Of course it is. That's part of the design. That design needs to look exactly the same as the physical one that's been built. However, much more important is this information. The fire rating, the height, the installation date, the serial number. When's the warranty going to run out? All that's the really, really important stuff if you're a facilities manager. Model's important, but by far the data overshadows that. So that's all the information that is being held in one central location. 3D model, we've spoken about that. You also have your 2D floor plans, but you have lots and lots of data and geolocation data. And with all this information, if you had a really big portfolio or an estate, and if you were able to just tap on it, and it takes you to all the buildings that you own, as a massive developer or a public body, i.e. the government, this is absolutely critical. With the touch of a button, you can find out anything about all your assets anywhere. Anywhere in the world even. Really, really good stuff. So why? Why should we use BIM? Why should we use BIM during facilities management? Well, first of all, the government said, if you want to work for us on a centrally procured project, by the 4th of April this year, so in a few months, you have to be able to work to level 2 BIM. Who's heard of level 2 BIM? A couple of people heard of level 2 BIM. Level 2 BIM. If you don't work towards or in line with these standards, specifications and protocols, you can't work for the government. You can't even tender for the job they put, for the work that they put out there. So very important. So they spent a lot of money in producing all these publications. Mervyn Richards, who some of you might have heard of or even seen speak, yeah, was it? He's the author of some of those specifications. Critical to the delivery of these projects. So I'm just going to go through those very quickly. PAS 1192 Part 2, obviously very important. It's a specification for information management during the capital phase. But what it says is, at stage 7, you must hand over an asset information model. Asset information model, which consists of the graphical model, the non-graphical data, we've spoken about data, and all the documentation that surrounds that. So O&M manuals, still going to be a PDF, but at least it's digital. And if it's named properly and serialized, we can find it really, really easily. PAS 1192 Part 3, AIR. This is a requirement. You must define your asset information requirements before you even start the project. Before you start the project, before you start designing, before you appoint anyone, you need to establish and define the client's asset information requirements early on. BS 1192 Part 4, COBE. This tells you how to hand over all the structured data to the client. Client being the government. So only on public, centrally procured government projects. It's a requirement. You have to do it. Another pillar on level 2. If you work on a level 2 project, you must comply and deliver all your projects in line with the government soft landing specification. The whole section 6 of that framework is focused on facilities management. So, that's all the reasons why you must. But let's say you don't work for the government. Let's say I'm just a private client. I don't procure a level 2 BIM project. Why else should I use BIM during operations? This is quite a popular graph which indicates the ratios between brief and design, delivery, and operation. So it says that if it costs £1 to design a project, it's going to cost 10 to deliver it, to build it. It's going to cost 5 times as much to maintain it, and another 40 times as much as maintenance to operate. So by far, the most money that will be spent by the client is during operations. Okay? So if we save 10% here, and save 10% here, if we can save 10% there, it's a huge, huge saving for a client. It overshadows all of this. Question?
I went to like an expert seminar
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago in relation to like energy efficiency. Like Andy said, like, it relates back to the design stage. Like, I'm not sure where my boss is going to go with meeting these requirements in April. So, is it possible to get like, do you know anyone that could design these? Could you design these for our company?
I'll speak to you afterwards. Yeah? Because I need lots more information, but I'll speak to you afterwards. I'm sure I know any, or I might know someone who can help. Okay.
I'll speak to you.
Right, okay. So this is really important. We need to be efficient. We need to save money through every phase, but especially during operations. Increased efficiency and productivity. We've already said it. If you're able to walk through your asset with all the digital information at hand, and if you're able to report a leaking pipe, or a light bulb that's blown, or a door that's creaking, if you can report that straight away, and someone can come and fix it instantly, imagine all the savings that can be had there. Huge savings, massive increase in productivity. So even if the government doesn't tell you, you must do it, as a client, I would definitely harvest all those benefits. Increased safety. I spoke about pedestrian simulation. This is a model where we simulated an emergency, a fire. And we looked at how people react in an emergency. and you could clearly see how congested it is at all the fire escapes, and whether they could get through all the turnstiles and easily escape from the building within the allocated time frame during the design stage. So if we use BIM in the beginning to analyze and test all these scenarios, we know that if those people can't escape within a certain time period, we need to add more fire escapes or just make them bigger and allow people to evacuate much quicker. Massive increase in safety during operations. Also, if something broke down in your facility and someone had to come and fix it, the person who comes and fixes it can look at the model and look at all the risks. If I had to change that light tube and I wasn't on site, how would I know what equipment I would need to come and fix it? If I could log into your system and see what this room looks like in a model environment, I can see, actually, hang on, I'm going to probably need a scaffold tower to fix it. So you're able to preempt all the equipment, all the safety measurements that you have to put in place before you get here. Because you don't want to get here and see, actually, hang on, I can't reach it, and then have to go back and come back again. Okay. So, we've got all the benefits of why. How? How do we do it? This is the difficult part. And as a project manager, this is pretty much what I do on a daily basis. Okay, how do we do it? Well, first of all, the model and information delivery must be tailored to the operational requirements. So you don't just do them. You don't just start and do it if you don't know what the information should look like at the end. So really important, which is why the end users and the facility manager must be engaged from the start. I don't see it ever, apart from the projects that we work on now, where they have to, where it's a requirement. We tell the client, we'll only support you if we have your whole operational team there to help influence the design. Okay, so really important. You must define which building components are models and how, because we don't model everything. We don't model skirting boards, architrave, light switches, and all the rest. You could if you really wanted to, and if that's what the client wanted. But the design team really needs to understand, what does the client want when I hand over that digital model? We don't model nuts and bolts of everything. It's way too much detail, too time consuming, costs too much money. Okay. So what information must be attached to those components? And how will we use that information during operation? 3 really key important points. So, people, understanding your operational requirements. It's important to understand who's going to use it. Is it one person sitting behind a computer who is going to manage the whole facility? Or is there going to be a team of them using iPads? You need to understand who's going to use it. And what will they use it for? Is it only information for if something breaks? Or are you going to look at all the other facilities management aspects and use that digital data? Importantly, is what you're going to hand over at the end going to replace what they're currently using? Or is it just going to be enhancing what they're doing? Because people can be really funny. If they've been managing a facility for 20 years using the same systems, and all of a sudden you come in and you say, well, by the way, at the end, you're going to have to use models and data and all this digital stuff, they get their backs up against the wall. And this is really important to engage with the people and say, this is the way we're going to do it, and really involve them in the process. So how are they going to use it? What other systems will it interface with? Is it something they're familiar with? If they're not familiar with it, what training do you as a client have to organize? It's it's great having all this information at the end, but if my operations team can't use it, it's useless. Then there was no point. So training is really important as well. Systems specification. Okay, what equipment will I need? If you've got a small office block, you might only need one computer. If it's Battersea Power Station, 1.2 billion pound for phase 2, you're going to need more than one computer. In fact, you're going to need a whole operations suite with dashboards and people working there, massive IT infrastructure. And that's going to have a massive cost implication. So you need to understand which one do I need for the type of information that I hand over. Simple. We worked on a project where the client didn't tell us that they only used software that was approved by IT. And when we came to install the operation software, it wasn't compatible with the IT protocols. And we went through a really lengthy process to get it approved and get it installed. Something that we weren't expecting. We just thought we'll get to the end and install it and everything will be fine. So governance is a really big thing to think of. Is it going to be stored in the cloud? These days, lots of information is being stored in the cloud. Or is it going to be stored in a server rack? Is there going to be a server room holding all your information? If you decide to put it up in the cloud, if you're the Ministry of Justice, building jails, then you need to be very, very sure that your information, all your models of all the jails are extremely secure. Because you don't want anyone breaking and stealing all those models and knowing exactly how to escape out of jail. Things to consider. Taxonomy or nomenclature is really just a term to say, well, okay, how do you currently name your things? What are you currently doing? Do you call a pump, or do you call it a hot water pump? How do you label it? Because all that information, bearing in mind that most clients already have information on their assets. And it needs to be streamlined with that information. So what are you currently doing? What do you call things? How have you divided your buildings into zones? Have you divided them into specific rooms? How did you call those? What did you call those rooms? And are the design team, are they actually using those same naming conventions? Also, I saw an example of a client who said, I want to be able to walk around with a phone and I want to be able to scan a barcode or a QR code, and I want all the information of that asset to pop up on my phone. So those are the things you need to be considering. Other clients might say, actually, hang on, that's probably going to cost too much and it's slightly overkill. We'll just put a label on it with the correct asset tag on it. So those are things to consider. When it comes to the requirements, I already said that it's important to engage with the FM team early on. So the project managers need to sit with the FM guys and say, well, okay, if this is a two-stage fit-out, so a Cat A fit-out and a Cat B fit-out, that means the guys who build it first won't be the guys who actually finish it. So how's that being procured? Because if my first team builds it perfectly in line with the protocols, and the second team come in and they do all the internal fit-out, but they don't adhere to all your standards and your protocols, you're not going to get quality asset information at the end. So someone needs to manage that process really well. How's that being procured? Who's managing that? Also, are the designers and the contractors aware of all the requirements? Are they aware that everything you've asked for has been documented and is in their scope of appointment, so in their contract? Because if it's not in the contract, and if you haven't captured all those information requirements in what's called an EIR, the Employer's Information Requirements, if it's not in there, and if it's not in the contract, and they get to the end, and they don't hand over a model or the correct data, and you say, well, hang on a minute, I asked for this. If it's not contractually binding, you can say goodbye, because you're not going to get it. So use the protocols that are out there at the moment to make that contractual arrangement and put it in place. Also importantly, who's going to check all the information that the designers create? If I hand over a model and the model says the pump manufacturer is a Toshiba and the model number is 107, but actually the pump that's been installed is a Mitsubishi and the model number is completely different, that information is wrong. So who checks it? Is there a commission manager that actually checks that the information that's being handed over at the end aligns and actually corresponds with what's built out on site? That's also my job. I need to make sure that the contractor who builds it installs something and updates the information. What happens if after the building's been handed over,